certification programs, among many other benefits. All right, so I'm excited about our session today using the WaterSense EPA Water Budget Tool. And this course is approved for AIBD, BPI non-whole house, as well as AP Homes for the Lead for Homes program under the Green Associates, as well as AIA Health, Welfare, and Safety, which may make it applicable to your state-based design or contractor license. Today I'll be your moderator. I'm Brett Little with the nonprofit, the Green Home Institute. And what we're going to be asking today is, how do we make informed decisions to save water outside, pick up some lead points, and be able to certify a project to say, hey, this is going to save water. And a real quick word from our top tier sponsor, introducing the all-new Rheem Prestige, an energy efficient and all-electric hybrid heat pump water heater. The future of water heating is finally here. 50, 65, or 80 gallons. The Rheem Prestige can serve many of your clients' different needs, up to 370% efficiency with a 3.7 uniform energy factor. Rheem stands behind their product with a 10-year warranty, quieter than your typical loud heat pump, and there are rebates available in many instances. One thing we're really excited about with these are the two different ways you can install them, depending on sometimes your climate, depending on how and where it's installed. So check with your HVAC there. You can do a ducted or ductless solution, again, depending on what your goals and strategies are. The Rheem Prestige also helps your clients stay smart with service notifications and potential leak detection, but still make sure you use that drip pan if you're installing it in above living spaces. Another thing, they're using these systems for battery backups in certain utilities so that they can draw energy at night and then use it in the middle of the day. So you can check with your utility on those special deals as well. Go to rheem.com/hybrid savings to learn more. And then also, thanks to our sponsor, Niagara Conservation. It's no surprise that toilets are the #1 cause of high water bills, and yet savings are only a simple flush away. Niagara Conservation has answered the call by developing the world's #1 water-saving toilet using advanced vacuum-assisted technology. That's right, vacuum-assisted and not pressure-assisted. We have glowing reviews from multifamily affordable housing renovation specialists who only spec these toilets because of their durability and cost savings. And you know, if they work in that situation, they'll work in any. They also have ADA approved models as well for a single side handle. How low can you go? The Stealth is 0.8 gallons per flush to get rid of those confusing dual flush options, or the new Nano dual flush does go all the way down to 0.5 gallons per flush. You can also check out their shower head at 1.25, which doesn't sacrifice comfort, and 0.5 gallon per minute aerators as well. They're all WaterSense certified too, which is great. Check out Niagara Conservation today for your next project. All right, well, I want to welcome our speaker, Olga Cano. She holds a BA in architecture and master's at the environmental engineering. As an architect and environmental engineer with the EPA WaterSense team, she works on new homes portfolio, focusing on the WaterSense new home certification, water efficiency in homes, energy efficiency as it relates to water heating and distribution. And so with that, Olga, I will turn it over to you, and please do take it away.
Great, thank you, Brett, for that introduction, and thank you for inviting us. I'm going to go ahead and I'll be sharing various screens, and we'll be switching back and forth between PowerPoint and our Excel worksheet. So I think to get everyone started, I'm going to go ahead and send you over, or if people want to follow, we're going to try to do this somewhat interactive. So if you all want to visit this web page, you can have access to the spreadsheet, and I can add this to the chat. I'll go ahead and add the link into the chat, and folks can then, I think I'm not showing, let me show my browser.
Yeah, wait a minute. Thank you.
You did, okay, excellent. Okay, so now I'm back showing, but let me try to show folks where, so you should be seeing my browser now. And if you go to our web page, there's a link to the WaterSense Water Budget Tool. It's an Excel workbook. So it can be downloaded from there, and then if you all would like, you can follow along with me. So let's go back. So I'll be switching over just back and forth. So if you can just bear with me, we'll go ahead and get started with the PowerPoint presentation. We'll be talking today about mainly about the water budget tool. The water budget tool was actually designed to help WaterSense labeled homes achieve their certification when it comes to the outdoor elements. WaterSense labeled homes is a program that we have under our WaterSense program at EPA, and it basically draws various requirements for homes to be water efficient. And so we look indoors, we look for items such as hot water distribution, leak prevention, pressure, make sure that all the plumbing fixtures are all WaterSense labeled, appliances, and the type of metering, which can be different between single families and multifamily. So there are various requirements in the indoors. And for outdoors, in terms of the landscape design, we ask that people use the water budget tool as a way to help them design their landscaping and to figure out how much water is needed. And so we'll talk basically more about the water budget tool and not about the indoor requirements. One nice thing about the water budget tool is that it really encompasses what our WaterSense program is about. As a program as a whole, we focus on 3 different aspects, meaning practices, people, and products. And what the water budget tool does is really, it takes into consideration how these 3 elements play together. So in terms of practices, we look at how the landscape is being irrigated, what type of irrigation it's being used, what type of plant typology is being implemented. We also take into consideration how people are behaving with the landscape, and so in which cases sometimes landscapes don't have irrigation. So what are the assumptions that we make that people will be irrigating manually? And then, of course, we plug in our products, which are weather-based irrigation systems and sprinkler bodies that have been WaterSense certified and perform just as well as standard products, but are more water efficient. So the tool really takes into consideration all of these aspects in helping you design the most efficient landscape. This is the section of our WaterSense labeled homes specification, which calls out the use or the requirement to use the water budget tool. We ask that landscape designers, we also have irrigation pros that have been trained in using the tool. And so we ask that they guide their landscape design to the tool as part of our certification and verification process. The irrigation professional will compare what the water budget tool outcomes or results were in terms of what is actually being planted and what is actually being delivered to at the end of the construction, to the homeowner. So this is really a tool that we like for people to base their designs on and also deliver, so that the homeowner also has a better understanding of what it is that they are receiving and how to better maintain their landscapes. Here, just I wanted to put out some terminology that we will be using throughout as we walk through the tool. So we'll refer to our landscape water requirement, which pretty straightforward is basically what is it, how much water is it that the plants or the landscape that you're putting out will need in order to thrive. Then we have the landscape water allowance, which is what the program, so in other words, what the tool will allow you to use so that you're being efficient and you're using that amount of water in an efficient way, but also naturally achieving that requirement so that the landscape continues to thrive. We also have a baseline, which we'll talk about more into about what the baseline, how the baseline is defined. And basically it's the standard which we are comparing the projects to. The ET, so evapotranspiration, which is part of our equations, DU, the distribution uniformities, just talking about how the irrigation systems are working, and hydrozones, which we will go into more detail once we start filling out the actual tool. Just a little bit of background in terms of where the data is coming from. So the ET was gathered from the World Water and Climate Atlas. We've gathered data from 1961 to 1990 for the ET, and then also have paired that with precipitation data from the same years. And with pairing those two, the tool then calculates when you input your zip code, what the ET is for each region, and the result is then the peak month that you will be receiving, or that the assumption that the tool will be working under the peak month. The way that the peak month is then defined is basically where it shows the largest gap between precipitation and ET. In regions where, so usually ET would be higher than precipitation, but in regions where the ET happens to be lower than precipitation, then that peak month is defined by when the ET is the highest. For the equations, I had put in some slides, but I'm going to go ahead and jump into the workbook just because I feel it would be more valuable for people to use it and know where to find them. So, so this is what the workbook looks like. So we have, if you look at the bottom, there's 4 tabs: introduction, data entry, results, equations, and tables. So the introduction will basically give you a background of what to expect from the tool and how to walk through it, which we will do so today. Data entry will ask you for specifics about your project, which we'll also do in detail here in a little bit. And then the results tab will give you essentially what you need. And in this section, it will tell you whether your project is achieving the efficiency that's required. Which essentially is we're looking for a 30% savings compared to the baseline of the project. And so the results will also include your landscape water allowance versus your requirement, and how much of the landscape is being treated as turf grass, the percentage, and then again the result, whether you pass or fail, essentially. And so here is where I was coming from the equations. So and if you download that Excel sheet, you will have access to seeing these for reference. So here we see the equation for the baseline, which is essentially it's the ET times the area times the conversion factor that we're using so that we can get gallons per month. This baseline is then used to calculate your landscape water allowance, which, like I mentioned earlier, should be a 30% savings from that baseline. And then your requirement, which is basically saying how much is it that the landscape needs in order to thrive. So those are our 3 key equations. For reference, we have also included the tables that show the coefficients that we're using for the different types of plant typologies. So we've got trees, shrubs, ground covers, turf grass, and also pools, spas, permeable hardscapes, and non-vegetated softscapes, which do account for parts of the landscape. Table 3 will then give you the DUs for the different types of irrigation systems that can be used. And Table 4, the irrigation types that are allowed, depending on the type of plants that you have. And then Table 5, assumed irrigation types for the landscape areas that don't have irrigation systems. So for instance, pools and spas are considered to be high water users. So we treat them as if they had fixed sprays. And trees and shrubs are treated as with drip standard. So these are all good, just good to have for reference, and also when you're designing your landscapes to make decisions as to if you have to add or reduce specific areas for the hydro zones. These are all good reference tables to have. So going back to the slides here. So the equations we talked about a bit. I wanted to go ahead and just walk people through the specifics of where in the Excel sheet we would be inputting data. So in the data entry, we have all of the basic project information. Then we will enter the landscape area, and you will have a choice to enter whether there will be an irrigation system installed or not. And then the most time consuming is here when you have to break down your landscape area into the different types of hydro zones, is what we refer them as, of plant typologies that you'll be including. When you do enter your zip code, the tool then auto-populates the ET and the average monthly rainfall that you'll find, as well as the peak watering month. So that's all auto-populated for you. Once you enter your landscape area, the tool will then auto-populate what the baseline is for that specific zip code and that amount of landscaped area, and then also what the LWA, so your landscape water allowance, will be for that. Once you get down into the table, and again, we'll be actually working through this, and people can submit questions as we work through it. Once you get into the table, you can start breaking down the amount of area, of landscape area, into the specific plant typologies that you will be including. And as part of that, you can pick the water use, irrigation type, and then all of this gray area will auto-populate to give you the coefficients and the requirements for each. Yeah, so that's a little bit of what I just talked about. So inputting your area, inputting your plant typology. And if you all notice, there's some red remarks that will start popping up. And these are errors that will pop up in case that any of the data that you enter previously might be conflicting. So we'll talk a little bit more about those. Once you start inputting information into the table, you'll start to see this area give you a sense of where you're at in terms of your landscape. So you have used, in this case, 84% of your allowance. This is 41% below the baseline. So it gives you a really good idea of how it is that, how you're doing in terms of distributing the type of hydro zones that you have and the types of plants that you might be using. Then you move over to your results tab. And here, I think I mentioned this earlier, you'll see then a summary of the inputs and the calculations that have been made. So you have a clear comparison of what the allowance was, as well as what the requirement would be. It gives you a breakdown of how much of your landscape is being treated as turf grass and the percentage of that. And then ultimately it tells you whether your landscape is approved or is being efficient enough or not. In the case that it is not, then of course you have to go back into the data entry tab and start adjusting the hydro zones that you had been working with. For the WaterSense labeled homes program, homes naturally have to have a passing result in this tab in order to move on to being certified. Here I wanted to talk a little bit more about some of the errors that might start showing up. So if, for instance, you have trees and you apply fixed spray irrigation to them, that is not allowed, and so it will tell you, and it's pretty self-explanatory. Fixed spray irrigation not allowed for trees, and so you can go ahead and correct those, and the error messages will then be cleared, and that's pretty much the case for all of these. So I basically just tried to pull up all the error messages that we have embedded into the tool just to get a feel for what they might be. So pools and spas, obviously you can't have drip, so you'll get an error message for that. Permeable hardscapes, also I set it as drip. So for permeable hardscapes, you can't have any irrigation. Non-vegetated landscapes, shrubs, ground covers. So here's one that could be tricky: shrubs and ground covers. So fixed sprays are not allowed, and so we'll give you the error for that. And we've actually been recently updating the tool, and so now in case that you do choose that the option of no for irrigation system installed in your project as a whole, then this whole region will just be red, and just so that users know that no irrigation type is required to be filled out naturally if there's no irrigation system that was installed. So a little bit, we find that we receive a lot of questions or requests for clarification into how the tool behaves when it's told whether we have an irrigation system or not in the projects. So we sort of did this little tree map to kind of clarify that. So does the landscape have an irrigation system? If you say yes, then the tool then assumes that the zones that are landscaped and that are receiving irrigation have automatic irrigation, and that they will survive basically without the user having to provide supplemental irrigation. So we're thinking, the users are not going to be going out to their landscapes and manually watering any of their landscape. If that's the case, then those efficiencies are then calculated by the values that are entered into the project, and this includes a value of 0 for those areas that are not irrigated, such as hardscapes and things of that nature. Now, if you go back and you choose yes for your irrigation system, I'm sorry, if you use no for your irrigation system, so no irrigation systems have been installed, then the tool is going to make a different assumption. In this case, it's going to assume that the landscape will then be manually irrigated, including in peak conditions. So this is a very different scenario in terms of how irrigation would behave and in terms of the assumptions that the tool is making. Versus having an irrigation system. And so if there is no irrigation, then the efficiencies that they're assumed according to the tables that I showed you earlier, tables 5 and 3, which refer to plant typology and the need for water for those plant types. This might also be a good time to just jump over back to here and show you one of the resources that we have in order to support the landscaping. So if you go to I'll go ahead and share this link. And here we have essentially a hub for the types of plants that are native to specific regions, and just some guidance on what type of landscaping and planting you can do in specific regions. They're all organized by state. I think we've covered all of the states, if I'm not wrong. So it's a really good resource, and it could really help in navigating the tool, especially when you're sort of at that borderline of passing or failing. So this is definitely something I would keep as bookmarked if you're working with the water budget tool often. I'm gonna head back to the presentation. And I think we might be ready to run through some sample projects. So before I go into that, Brett, if we had any questions before that, or if I should just go ahead and go for it.
I just wanted to, I guess, seek some clarification on the irrigation versus no irrigation, and just to confirm that, you know, when you do select no irrigation, it's only really impacting the things that you know, don't have any irrigation, right? But the items that need to be irrigated still, those are still going to show up with some water demand, correct?
Yes, that is correct. Yes, and thank you for clarifying that. Yes. So yes, you'll still have, even if there is no irrigation system, you're still going to need water, right, for the landscaping to thrive. So I think the point I wanted to drive there is just that even if there is no irrigation system installed, you will still have a water allowance, you'll still have a water requirement. It's simply that the assumption that the tool is making is that the landscape is being irrigated differently. And so the way that the tool will calculate will be, or the assumptions that it's making are different than when there is an irrigation system. Yeah, so thank you for that.
Well, I was thinking about saving this question to the end, but it probably in the back of everybody's mind. And for those who, you know, are looking at using rainwater, I know LEED, for example, does have a pathway for that, and I'll show you all that a little bit later. It doesn't tell you how to do it, it just tells you where to put the number, of course. But in your case, what do you recommend, or what do you do when folks are using rain barrels or cisterns to water their landscape?
Yeah, and that is a question that we get often. As part of our certification system, we don't specifically have rainwater collection or reuse embedded into these calculations. Not because we don't feel that it isn't an efficient or it's a viable way of reusing water, but mostly because we don't have the data to actually plug it into the tool and make strong assumptions about the way that is using the efficiency or the savings that it can provide. And so in terms of that, the systems specifically are not included. However, there are various ways, right, in which we can use rainwater and reclaimed water. So the systems like drip irrigation can be a good example. So if you are, for instance, installing if you're hooking up your rain barrel into a drip irrigation system or something to that extent, then that's something that could be accounted for because we know how drip systems are behaving. Yeah, does that answer the question?
I'll let them follow up if it doesn't. I guess I'll just,
okay. Gotcha.
I'll just reiterate that anyone who is looking for some rainwater advice, we've got a session coming up here in a month, and then also you can look to the HERS H2O program and or the water efficiency rating system, the WERS. They both, I believe, especially the WERS, I've personally used some great assessment for rainwater catchment and outdoor irrigation. So take a look at that. Another question that came up is, does the tool assume that if no irrigation, manual watering is more or less efficient than really efficient irrigation?
So the data says that the most efficient is having an irrigation system installed. That's and basically just because they're automated and they're pretty predictable, whereas manual irrigation isn't. And so it could be that they're efficient or more efficient than irrigation systems, but that also leaves the question of how is the landscape thriving. So it's just very difficult to sort of calculate human behavior essentially, and knowing, and every user is gonna manage that or view that in a different manner. So I think the answer to that is just the math is much more clear when we use actual systems.
Great, thanks. Well, thanks for taking a second to answer our questions, and you can continue on.
Okay, awesome. So we'll go ahead and just jump into the tool so that folks can get a little bit familiar with the actual workbook. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a sort of typical home, 10,000 square foot lot with a 2,400 square footprint area, 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, which doesn't really matter in this case because we're looking at the outdoors. And then the number that we're really going to be using is this 5,826 square feet of landscape area. And so this is sort of the average American home per se or landscape area that we use. And this is basically to see to showcase how the tool is behaving. So it's not to say that every home is this way or that everything fits the bill, but just for practical terms, essentially. So there we have our landscape area. So I had some screenshots, but I'm going to go ahead and switch over to the actual tool and we will play around with that one. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and do 2 cities and then I'll do 2 different scenarios for each of the cities so that we can see how they're behaving. So the first, I'm going to use a zip code in South Florida. And then I'll switch the irrigation input to yes and no, and we can see how that behaves. And then the second city I'll use is northwestern Seattle, basically. And then again, I'll do one with yes, irrigate to an irrigation system being installed, and with no irrigation system. And then we'll see how we have to manipulate the hydro zones to calculate it. So again, you'll come in and you just for project identification, if you're using the water, if you're doing this for a WaterSense certification, then all of this needs to be filled out naturally for project identification. I'm sure LEED also has requirements for that. So, just your name, the builder name, lot and address, or how to identify the specific site, city, and zip code. So 33155 is what I'll be using. And then you'll see that it is being populated. So we have our peak watering month being April, our ET being 6.64 inches per month, and our average monthly rainfall about a little bit over 2 inches. We'll go into here and then we'll input that typical landscape, which was 5,826 square feet. And so you'll see that this auto populates. So it gives us a baseline telling us that we have a little bit over 24,000 gallons per month that the baseline requires. However, the allowance is cut back to almost 17,000 gallons. So this is the savings that we are aiming for. And so the first exercise will go with yes. Is there an irrigation system installed? Yes. And then we'll come down here and start breaking down the areas. Naturally, we want all of these area breakdowns to add up to the total landscape area so that everything is accounted for. So we're going to say we have about 1,000 square feet of trees. And and just for practicality, I just tried to sort of round out these numbers so that you can just walk through them. And I'm going to say they have a low water use. And I'm going to say they are drip irrigated. And just for fun, I'll just show you if I say that they have a fixed spray, you see this error message coming up, which is what I was referring to earlier. So we'll leave it at a drip. Then I'm going to add another 2,500 square feet of turf. And it doesn't like you to type it in. Usually you're better off just using the pull down. And we're going to say it's high demand. I should know better. And we're going to tell it it's got a fixed spray. Okay, and then you'll see how we start to see how we're doing in terms of percentages of how much we are allowed versus our baseline. Okay, and then of course this won't go away until we have the total landscape that we're working on. So 1,500 square feet of ground cover. And we're going to say that's a medium water use. And we are going to be using drip also for that. And then we have 826 square feet of shrubs and medium water demand. And again, drip. Okay. Okay, so you'll see that here we are way beyond our water allowance. And if you go to the water tab, to the results tab, you'll see that that's not working out for us. So we need to be under this 16,877, and we're about 2,000 plus gallons over. So again, you just have to come back and let's tell it the turf grass is low, still has the fixed spray, and so then that did it. Okay, and so this is, so you can see just what one option, how it can impact the results. Okay, if we take the same data and we tell it that in the case of Florida, and we tell it that we don't have an irrigation system, so you see that this is now blocked off. So it's not expecting any irrigation to be input in there, but we're still okay. So the requirement is a little bit higher, but we're still under that allowance that it gave us. So this is a pretty easy example just to see of how it could behave one way or the other. Now we'll go ahead and try the Seattle location, which behaves a little bit different. So the zip code over there is 98. And we see that this all changes. So now our peak watering month is July. Our average ET is 5.34. Our monthly rainfall, 0.65. Our baseline higher than in Florida, and our allowance. Let's start first with the yes, we do have an irrigation system. And this is actually working out pretty well for Seattle. So if we kept the trees, all the landscape divided into the same amount, the trees and the turf grass as low and the ground covers with a little bit more demand, we're still doing okay and very close to our allowance, but still passing, meaning that here's that percentage that I had referred to earlier. So it's still showing that 30% efficiency, we 1% above that, which is how that's closer. Now, if we come back, we'll leave all of these entries the same, but we say no irrigation, then we're way, we're above, and actually not that bad in terms of our requirements. So we just have to come back and figure out which one of these we can switch. You can also, of course, make modifications to the amount of area that you have for each of the landscape. But for the sake of this exercise, we'll just say that we switch the ground cover to low water demand for those for the ground cover, and so that fixes the glitch, and now we're okay, and it saved a bunch of water. And then you have your yes. This section of the sheet is meant to be, to provide a printout so that you can have sort of like as proof and as a summary. So you can always print this out and include that with your documentation. And this is more just for reference. You wouldn't be printing that out necessarily. So this is really what you would look into. So that's basically, it's really pretty straightforward. I think sometimes we get caught up in sort of the background information that is included in the tool, but it's a pretty easy tool to use. Heading back to the presentation, so we walked through the projects.
Olga.
Yeah.
I don't know if you already planned to talk about this, but somebody was asking about how you factor in permeable hardscape, or if you can put that into the tool and show us.
Oh, sure. So let's go back. And actually, before I do that, there is a good resource. I was actually going to show a list of the resources at the end, but I'll show you now. So if you go to the Water Budget Tool landing page where you obtained the Excel sheet, there's also a link to a quick start guide, and as well as the water budget approach. And you'll actually find very specific technical information as to how we make those approaches. So that's just a good place to point you to. But I'll definitely go back into the tool and see how that behaves. Okay, so let's say instead of, some people were asking about hardscape.
Yeah, permeable hardscape.
Right, okay. So we switch that over to permeable hardscape. In the case of Seattle, we're still okay. So of course there's no irrigation completed. However, if we tell it that there is an irrigation system, then we have to say, it's not being irrigated. And so in this case, the way that the tool handles it, it's part of your area, but it's non-irrigated. And so there's no water demand, or it doesn't account for your water requirement.
So it's really a benefit to have
correct.
It, as opposed to something that you have to water, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. And I guess that's the difference between pools and if you have any other water features. So those are handled differently because they are handled like if they were turf grass, so very high demand. Whereas these other features, such as hardscapes or non-vegetated softscapes, those are actually beneficial. Yes.
Thank you.
Sure. So heading back, I just had one last series of simulations that I wanted to share with you all, and it's just really more in terms of how the water tool, the water budget tool, can behave, and kind of like the insight that it can provide us in terms of how water use can be seen throughout the country. And so here we basically just where did I go? We were looking to see when or where in the country specific scenarios start to be most efficient, least efficient, and how they play out throughout the country. So in this case, which is our most efficient, so if you see the scale, the legend, what it's calling out is 100% green is assuming that there's the maximum amount of turf grass in your landscape. As the percentage lowers, then you start to introduce other types of plant types. So in the most efficient, we see that you have low water using turf, and then you have a mix of some other ground covers and shrubs, and you're using drip, so drip irrigation. And so in this case, it's like we can have some level of turf grass in almost every single state in the United States, right? As we start to change that mix of plants, then we start to see some of the regions, especially in the West Coast, to have more restrictions into how much turf and what kind of irrigation systems you might be using. So in this case, we plugged in high water using turf, and instead of drip now, we're using fixed spray, and then we're still keeping the supplemental or the additional vegetation as low watering. So you start to see that some parts of the country start to not look as green as others. And we continue to sort of do that simulation. Again, high water using turf with the fixed spray, but then upping also the water demand that we have for the other type of irrigation, like trees and shrubs and ground cover. And as we assumed, it would just make the country just redder without being able to use as much turf as we would like to see. And of course, once you start using high demand everything, then yeah, it's just inefficient anywhere you look, except for, I guess, little pieces of Hawaii. So yeah, I wanted to show this just to kind of get a sense of the scale and how it could behave in different regions. So I think that was it. Then I just wanted to, these are a series of resources that I think I touched upon as we were going through the tool. The water budget tool is where you can access the Excel sheet. The water budget approach is the technical paper that will explain all of the background information and the equations and the data, the assumptions that have been made. What to plant is that resource, that data hub basically that we have of regional plant typologies that can be used or that are recommended. I don't think I popped into this. So these are irrigation professionals. They are certified and trained in our WaterSense program, and they can serve as achieving one of the requirements for the certification for the WaterSense labeled home certification. So they're good resources if you are ever looking for professionals that are trained in designing landscapes in this manner. WaterSense Outdoors also has great information, again, about plant typology and different types of irrigation systems. And last but not least, the WaterSense labeled homes, which is the program that we work under, and basically the program that the tool was essentially designed for.
Olga, you mentioned one of the prerequisites was irrigation professional. So I guess without getting too far into it, because we've done a workshop on WaterSense entirety and we have that available, but is it required to have a certified irrigation professional, or is that one of like a pathway of a few other handfuls of options?
Yeah, if there is an irrigation system installed, then yes, an irrigation professional either has to design it or install it, and it's part of one of the requirements. Mm-hmm.
Great, thanks. Well, I can jump into some of the lead stuff here and then get into questions. Does that sound good?
Sound good.
All right, thank you so much. Go ahead and there we go. So for those of you, the WaterSense program is a pathway for LEED and our internal GreenStar Home certification program. National Green Building Standard references the program as well. So there's a lot of benefits to doing this, and it's components of these green building programs. So from a LEED standpoint, you're making a decision about going prerequisite performance or prescriptive. So just if you think of just like energy modeling, right? Most of LEED now is going the way of requiring performance-based testing, no matter what, and scoring points based on projected energy reduction. The same goes now for LEED and many other green programs for water performance, right? We can now estimate and gauge how much water reduction there'll be in a project, both indoors and outdoors. So if you decide that you want to continue down the prescriptive route on the right side there, you can track, the efficiency ratings of and WaterSense certification of toilets and all that. And then for outdoors, you can track the percentage of native adaptive plants versus the percentage of turf, and that's one way. The way I would really encourage you to use, and the way to pick up a lot more points, is on the left side there, which is to use the total water performance pathway, and that is where this tool comes into play. And you need to know your team, hopefully your landscape architect will know a lot about it. So here is from the online credit category that's available to everyone through LEED. It's a great resource. It has all the information on it. You don't need to have a massive 500-page manual anymore. It's all online, always up to date. And this is going to be the same both for V4 homes, multifamily, mid-rise, single family, and also V4.1, which isn't valid, it isn't approved yet for single family, but it is in beta and probably most likely will use the same pathway. So again, we're looking at total water usage, and so we want to get at least a 10% reduction in total water usage. That can come from indoors, that can come from outdoors, you name it. And then, so as far as the outdoor component of that is, there's just some recommendations here: installing smart scheduling technology for moisture sensor control, weather-based irrigation system, use captured rainwater, use reclaimed rainwater, use water treated on site or conveyed by a public agency, specifically for non-potable uses to prevent it from going into surface water streams. So the way that looks, here is an example, a screenshot of the workbook as far as outdoor water usage goes. And we're looking at two very specific inputs. On the top, we're looking at the baseline for the site. So that's again saying what the site should use in comparison to another site. And then the second one we're looking at is landscape water requirement, or LWR. So to be sure, there is another thing called landscape water allowance, and that is what your threshold is to meet WaterSense certification. But LEED doesn't, at this point, doesn't care anything about that. We don't look at that at all. And also you should know LEED doesn't require you to meet EPA WaterSense certification program. I will say that if you don't meet it, in anecdotal practice, you probably won't score very many points outdoors. It's not always the case, but or at least as far as your total water usage for the entire project. But it's not a requirement. It's not mandatory, but we encourage it, of course. And I think WaterSense certification is like an extra innovation point if you want to pursue the whole thing. So this is kind of how it works, and you can see on the bottom there's sort of your total water use reduction. So that's not outdoor use, that's total water use. You got to use this calculator from the LEED workbook to get a full idea of what we call your water performance usage, both indoor and out, and then make an informed decision with your client on where to spend money and effort and time. Is it outside? Is it inside? Is it a little bit of both? Which that usually is the case. So that's what you want to be looking at. And so the rainwater, gray water approach there, line item on the bottom, again, there's no way to get that information from EPA. So that is a standalone, and quite frankly, there's not much information on how to achieve that. It's really, for now, a pretty open-ended approach that you just have to show your work and back up your justifications as how you're saying you're catching rainbow water or cistern water or a gray water system. We just, so as I mentioned, there's some fantastic tools out there. HERS H2O, I believe will have it. And then right now, one that does exist through the Green Builder Coalition is the Water Efficiency Rating System, which you can just go in. You can't use it for LEED, but you can go in and make some really good informed design on both rainwater and or gray water for your projects. So that is how you approach LEED. So before we wrap up here, we're going to get into questions too. Definitely want to get to any of your questions. Make sure, for those of you listening live, to check your inbox for your certificate and take that survey, please. For those of you watching this in the future on demand, take the CEU quiz with an 80% passing rate. To find the quiz on our YouTube channel, click on the YouTube link. And then on the left side there, click on the Show More tab. And then on the right side, scroll down underneath the information and then click how to access that quiz and follow the instructions from there. And again, before we get to those questions, a huge thanks to our board of directors, all of our volunteers, all of our members who support our work, to all of our speakers this year, and our top tier sponsors, Mitsubishi Electric, hitting net zero in single family, new and existing multifamily buildings, going all electric, air source heat pumps, Ream for air source water heat pumps, and then Build Equinox for smart ventilation to help reduce energy use and ventilate projects correctly. So let's take a look at some of the questions here. I know I had a couple questions as we're waiting for those to come in as well. And let me pull that up here for you, Olga. You know, if what kind of training and cost is there involved, if any, for people to, if they have a landscape professional on their team who wants to feel more confident and get certified in your program? What does it entail? What kind of costs, if any, and you know, what does it involve? Is there continuing ed, or what does that look like? Muted. Oh, you're muted. I can't hear you.
It always happens. So yeah, so what we have are programs that have been certified by WaterSense, and they serve as our liaison to train irrigation professionals. So you can I could definitely point you, and I'll look for the link now and share it in the chat. You can check with those organizations, and in terms of pricing, it all varies because they, you know, it's up to their criteria and discretion, how they charge, and also their structures might be different, where some might be, you know, day-long workshops versus online versus, so there really is a mix of what it is. But I'll go ahead and look up that now and share it in the chat. And then in terms of the actual content, they look at various things such as irrigation system design for different types of irrigation systems, as well as landscaping, plant typology, you know, what's more efficient, what's native, what's not. And then some programs also include things such as hardscapes and softscapes and how those behave in terms of efficiency.
Now I'm muted. Thank you. So another specific question here is, yeah, I guess if you don't have that hired professional or can't find one as a, you know, cost barrier, is there any, I guess, does EPA provide any kind of support? Like, hey, I've got a project that's in the end of design phase. We're submitting here soon. I know with landscape, thankfully, a lot of times you can figure that out while the home is just wrapping up construction. Sometimes you get a whole extra year, which is helpful for the landscape architects who need a little more time. But you know, can they reach out to you and get a design review, get any help, or is it all just sort of all the and great resources you have online? I mean, I've found them to be very helpful. How does that work?
Yeah, so we're always happy to take questions and support any of our folks that are trying to pursue our programs, and we're happy to provide feedback. So you can always reach us to my email is there on the screen, or you can reach our helpline. However, it is a requirement that you do have a professional, an irrigation professional on board, and so we can help you in identifying one. There are cases where there simply aren't any professionals available within a specific mile radius of your project. And so for specific programs, we can definitely look at it at on a case-by-case scenario and make decisions based on that. We have provided waivers in some cases, so that is a possibility. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. So, you know, we, from a lead standpoint, there are a lot of opportunities outside of the U.S., outside of North America, who you have to use these same pathways currently. So I guess if somebody outside of the U.S. Wanted to utilize this tool, do you have any recommendations or advice? Because I know, for example, like the energy rating softwares, they just have to try to figure out what climate zone they're in, and then they can use it. Is that the same kind of deal for this? You've got to kind of figure out what kind of the watering zones that you're in, or have you had that conversation before?
Yes, we have, and I mean, yeah, I think you answered the question. It's a matter of the data that is embedded into the tool is very US specific, and so the workaround for that is, yes, identifying a region that is similar into environmental similarities to the one that you're looking outside of the US. And that could be challenging sometimes, but yeah, we don't have the international data to support that.
And I know you showed us the version 4 of your checklist, I believe, which is good timing for Lead. This is the version we're in. I didn't see it online though. If someone wanted to go download the tool, maybe I missed it. Is it up there? Is it coming soon?
It was, I believe it was updated this morning, so it should be there.
Okay.
Yes.
So all right, I probably just.
So it's very, very fresh. Yeah, we for anyone who was previously familiar with the tool, we actually had a web-based tool, and that's been phased out just due to technical issues. So now we just have the Excel, and so we've restructured it a little bit so that it's a little bit, well, I think it's much more user-friendly and can guide you through it easier. So yes, the new version should be there. If you we try to keep that link updated with the most current version. So I would just encourage people, if you're put it away and you're going to use it 6 months from now, to just come back and make sure that you have the most current version. Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, I'm going to end by asking you kind of 3 questions that I think will all have the same answer. But we're at our time. I don't see any more questions. This has been really great. I really appreciate you. This is your second time on coming back, so I thank you for coming back. We'll get you back for version 5, right?
Yeah, I'll be there.
Maybe have you out for a real session here in Michigan when we can all get together in real life someday. Right. But just so real quick, number 1, is the tool free to access? Just remind us of that. Number 2, can people get on a newsletter as items get updated so they can get informed? And to wrap that up, where can people go to find? Just remind them where they can go to contact you or find more information.
Yeah, thank you for that, Brett. Yeah, so yes, the tool is absolutely free. It's essentially open source. We encourage people to use it, and if you send us an email, well, you can send me an email directly to canada.olga@epa.gov or reach our helpline. We'll be happy to add you to our newsletter, which will let you know of any updates that we have coming up. There's actually an update coming up for the Homes program that's pretty exciting and different from what we have now. So if you want to stay in the loop for that, definitely reach out and we can add you to that. We don't want to bombard your emails with non-necessary information. And the third question.
Where can people go to get more information or contact?
Yeah. So yeah, just essentially we're a small team, but we really make a big effort in providing support and the best customer service that us federal employees can provide. So yes, just please reach out.
All right. Well, Olga, thank you so much. Thanks to the EPA. Before we wrap up, obviously, just everybody, please follow all social distancing guidelines. Wear your mask wherever you go. Stay in if you possibly can. Help each other out. Stay safe out there. I've got to beat this thing, and we want to see you all in person in real life someday. So stay safe, follow the protocols, and have a fantastic week. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you all.